Right, this is video number 5 in the series, and what we're going to be exploring in this video is how to make the metal centre. You should already have your two plastic sides. If we look at there, you can see in the middle bit, the bit where the string gets tied around, is an aluminium and metal centre. So let's look at that a little bit more closely. You'll notice it has a 4mm hole through it, which is how it fits very neatly on that. And I don't know if you can see from the picture, but the surface of it has a texture on it. The surface has been knurled. Now that's something that we're going to look a little bit more closely at in a moment. Right, let's look at the tools we're going to use. That whole operation has to happen on the centre lathe. Now if we zoom in on these tools that we're going to use on the centre lathe, this one, the round-ended cutter, you should be pretty familiar with. We've used the round-ended cutter for skimming. This is a new one. This one here is called a knurling tool, and it has wheels on it that spin and come into contact with metal and press a texture onto it. And this final one, which is quite difficult to see, has a cutter on it, but the cutter is very narrow. That one there is called a parting tool. That's the one you're actually going to cut off a section of the aluminium bar with, and that's why it's narrow. Okay, let's go over to the centre lathe and look at how to change the tool, because it's quite possible when you come to the lathe it will actually have the wrong tool in. This lathe, for example, you'll see still has the round cutter in. Now that's going to be no good for this operation, so we're going to change it. We'll put a spanner on the nut on the top and turn that, lift off the cutter and replace that then with our knurling tool. Okay, that drops in place. Tighten the nut back up again, and you can see that that's now ready to go. We're going to be pressing, after we've drilled our hole through the centre, the texture from that knurling tool on there. Right, so as the example showed, it has a 4mm down the centre of the bar. Now, in order to put the 4mm centre in, we're going to be using, in the same way that we did when we counterbored, the Jacob's chuck in the tailstock. Okay, and in that this time we've taken out the end mill cutter that we used and we've replaced it with a centre drill. So it's got quite a fine point on it. The idea of this is that it will start off a hole. You will not drill a hole all the way through with it. It will just start a hole on the end of our aluminium bar. Okay, you'll see the aluminium bar there now poking out of the centre lathe. Right, things to remember on the tailstock. Don't forget, once you've put it in position, to lock it in position with that upright there. And also make sure there's a second lever that lock is off. That's the one that allows the travel on the actual tailstock. Right, having done all those checks and made sure that we've got the aluminium tightly fixed into this end and that you've got no more than about 25mm poking out, we can put our chuck guard down and we can start the operation. So if we start the lathe up, okay, we just wind that in. Now as that winds in, it's not a great picture, but you can see waste material coming out, swarf coming out. That waste is often extremely hot, but also very sharp. So never be tempted, whilst it might look sparkly, and particularly when we're drilling you'll notice it looks sparkly, never be tempted to touch it. Right, let's change the drill in our Jacob's chuck now. We're looking for a standard 4mm drill. Okay, so we're going to put a 4mm drill into that chuck. Tighten it back up again with the chuck key. Okay, and then we're ready to go back in with the tailstock again. Lock it in position. Start the lathe and wind that in. Yes, you can see that longer pieces of swarf coming off now, which look quite interesting, but are deadly sharp and very hot, so caution. In terms of the distance you wind that drill in, don't be thinking you're going to wind that drill the entire length into that bar. You only really want to go in maximum sort of 2 centimetres and just be prepared to come back in again when you're producing another one. So that will certainly give you one piece off there. You're going about 2 centimetres or 20mm. That's done now. Okay, we're now ready, having got our hole down the centre. You may be able to see that now. We're now ready to start with the knurling. So we're going to move onto the controls on the side again, like you did when you were skimming, and you're going to bring that in line with your bar. Okay, we're ready to start the lathe, and you're just going to gently bring that knurling tool towards the material and just press it on. You probably can't see on this video, it's actually starting to press that texture onto our bar. Okay, right, and you can bring that away. Change the tool. So we're going to now change the tool in the same way that we did right at the beginning, from the round-ended cutter. We're going to lift off the knurling tool, and we're going to bring in the parting tool, which was the very narrow cutting tool. Okay. In terms of distance that you want to cut off, your centre is going to be approximately the width of that knurled section. If you bring the cutter in just at the beginning of that, if you want it a specific width, and in theory you should be working very accurately, you can bring in a steel ruler, and you can lay that against the cutter, up against the edge of the cutter, and obviously you can then accurately measure off exactly how much you want. Okay, but it should be between 6 and 10 millimeters. Right, we're ready to part that off now, so let's bring down the cover, bring the cutter in. Same thing as the knurling tool, gently bring the cutter in. You don't need to move it back and forwards or up and down the bar, it's more straight across the bar. Gently keep that feeding in. If you try and do it too quickly, it won't cope with it, so it's a nice gentle. Okay. If the cutter stops cutting, as it has here, you need to bring it out. Because aluminium is a very soft metal, it heats up and actually attaches itself onto the tip of our cutter. And you can use a steel ruler just to knock that piece off, and then you're ready to go on your way again. You can see that's happened a couple of times with that waste, so don't worry if it does happen. Just bring back the cutter, just gently knock that off. Okay, and you can see then that final piece has come away, and the end of our bar has a slight impression of a hole in it, but you will need to then drill that from the end and knurl it and so on, and repeat that process. Be cautious about picking up the piece that's come off immediately. Sometimes that comes off really hot. I don't know if you can see the texture on that, but what you've got then there is your metal component part for your centre, which means you can then move on to the next stage, which is getting them assembled.